Hello, this is my first video in English. I'm a Spanish channel, but I thought I know English and maybe I could reach a wider audience if I did the videos simultaneously in Spanish and in English. So just bear with me as I figure out my pronunciation, because even though I studied a lot of English, I never speak it. So I hope that throughout the videos it will get better. But I hope you understand me too well enough. Just as a quick introduction, I'm Eli, I'm from Argentina, I'm an editorial designer and an artist. So a lot of my channel revolves around art, but also makeup and things that I find fun to do. So let's get started with this video. Today, while I continue embroidering postcards for an artistic project, I have an exhibition in just 1 month, I will be talking about an artist. I was already familiar with part of his artwork, but as I was researching for this art project, I discovered another part of his work. This artist is the great MARC Chagall. MARC Chagall was born in 1887 in Vitebsk, in what is now Belarus. He was a painter of Jewish origins, and I mention his religion because it's fundamental to understanding his work and what I'm going to talk about in this video. Let's first establish some historical context. From the late 19th century until the end of World War I, in 1918, the Russian imperial government confined Jews to what was called the confinement zone, which encompassed present-day Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. This led to the creation of Jewish market towns throughout what is now Eastern Europe, with their own markets, schools, hospitals, and other community institutions. After the war, 4 great empires ceased to exist as they have been: the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman. Both Germany and Russia lost a significant portion of their former territories, while the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires were dismantled. So the map of Europe and its borders changed completely, and new states were formed. At the end of World War I, the Russian Revolution took place, culminating in the creation of the first state in history to call itself socialist, the Soviet Union. So let's return to Chagall, born in 1887, in what was then the Russian Empire in Belarus in the confinement zone. Jewish children were not allowed to attend regular schools, and universities imposed quotas on them. Their movement within the city was also restricted and severely controlled. Therefore, Chagall received his primary education at the local Jewish school, where he studied Hebrew and the Bible. At age 13, his mother tried to enroll him in a regular secondary school, and he recalled, but the school didn't accept Jews. Without hesitating for a moment, my courageous mother approached a teacher. She offered the principal 50 rubles to let him attend, which he accepted. Chagall began borrowing books from the library and copying drawings, influenced by a classmate. He recounts that this was the beginning of his artistic journey. In 1906, he discovered the studio of Yuri Pen, a realist artist who ran a drawing school in his hometown. At the same time, future artists El Lisitsky and Osip Satkin were also Penn students. However, after a few months at the school, Chagall realized that academic portraiture wasn't for him. Goodman points out that during that period in Imperial Russia, Jews had 2 ways to enter the art world. One was to hide or deny their Jewish roots, and the other one, the one that Chagall chose, was to value and publicly express their Jewish roots by integrating them into his art. For Chagall, the essence of his religion was surrendering to divine goodness, trust, joy, happiness, and will. And his childhood experiences would be eternal influences on his work. In 1907, Marc Chagall moved to St. Petersburg and studied for a few years at the Imperial Art School. He remained there until 1910, frequently visiting Vitebsk, where he met Bella Rosenfeld, the love of his life. They would get married time later and remain together until her death. Their love story is also quite beautiful, and she played a fundamental role in his entry into the intellectual circles of the time. In 1910, he moved again, this time to Paris. He declared that he was reborn in Paris. At that time in France, the most prominent artists were Cézanne, Van Gogh, Lautrec, Gauguin, Matisse, Braque, and Picasso. Sometimes I find it hard to grasp that all these artists from art history books shared the same era and circles. In Paris, Chagall felt for the first time that he could be and express himself freely, and he began his most prolific years of artistic production. By the time the Russian Revolution broke out, Chagall was actively involved and returned to Vitebsk. There, he founded a small school based on absolute freedom and invited painters as diverse as Malevich and Lissitzky, who, inspired by the ideas of the newly emerged revolution, proposed a type of geometric painting so radically opposed to Marc Chagall's sensibility that they eventually fell apart. In 1920, he moved to Moscow and then to Paris in 1923. With the German invasion of France during World War II and the deportation of Jews to Nazi extermination camps, Marc Chagall had to leave Paris. Finally, with the help of some of his close contacts, in 1941, Chagall and Bella went into exile in the United States. Therefore, it must be understood that Chagall's entire life was a constant back and forth, trying to settle and then having to flee again for survival. The religious persecution and prejudice of those years were atrocious. Even so, from 1925 onward, Chagall repeatedly mentions in his recovered letters that he was involved in an illustration project of the biblical Genesis for the publisher Bollard in Paris. In a letter to Leo Koenig, he says, "I will paint the prophets, even though the atmosphere here is not prophetic. On the contrary, evil reigns we must resist. Strange as it may seem, in our time, which despite its many achievements, I consider deranged, one feels the need to escape to another dimension and not forget that trends have ruined the classic icons of faith in religions. Art hasn't smelled good for a long time now. The purity of the soul has been replaced by a sewer. Forgive my bluntness. What I'm doing now is a book of prophets for Bollard with 100 prints, and he reveals that he has been working on this project for at least 5 years. Evgenia Kuzmina says, as a result of a commission from Ambrose Bollard in 1930, Chagall conceived his sketches during a period marked by anti-Semitism and the threat of war, grim political circumstances that are reflected in his iconography. The body language of the figures and the symbolic use of color are artistic resources that construct the biblical semantics of the works. Chagall's biblical universe is filled with the mystery and cosmic beauty present in nature and found in the spiritual traits of prophets, angels, and animals. Chagall's figures float in atmospheres. Mircea Eliade says, Chagall discovered the mystery and sacred character of nature. The nature he created is primitive and maternal, a place where man, animal, and angels live together in peace under the care of God or under a great moon. Another interesting perspective is that of Jacques Maritain, who says, "Here, Chagall didn't want to be Jewish. He read the poetry of the Bible and he only wanted to represent that poetry." MARC CHAGALL, in his own words, said that he considered the Bible the greatest source of poetry of all time and then a profound echo of human nature. And I can perfectly understand what he means. I'm not particularly religious, but having read some of the books of the Bible for this art project, it's really a very poetic text, full of metaphors and symbolisms beyond religious teachings. Lewis writes that Chagall remains the most important visual artist to have witnessed the world of Eastern European Jews, and without realizing it, he became the public witness to a now vanished civilization. Chagall had a complex relationship with Judaism. On the one hand, of course, there were his Belarusian Jewish cultural backgrounds, which were very important to his artistic imagination, but as an adult, he wasn't a practicing Jew. But he continually tried to suggest a more universal language, using both Jewish and Christian themes. I've always been particularly drawn to this artist's sketches, not the selected and final works for exhibition, but the sketches, the studies, the preliminary compositions. And in this particular series, it's interesting that for some of these passages he chose to illustrate, there are multiple sketches in addition to the final piece, revealing his thought process and the divergences of it. They have different approaches. Some are color studies, others studies of form. These sketches are more synthetic and distorted. All these sketches feel urgent, not because he was rushed on his commission, but in a sense of creative urgency, when one has an idea that needs to be put on paper because it comes to them in a rush. It's difficult to explain, and it's not the way contemporary artists generally work, but when it happens, it's wonderful and imperative. Chagall is considered one of the most influential modernists of the 20th century, both for being one of the first ones and for his important role within the Jewish artistic legacy. And I wasn't familiar with this part of his work, and I found it wonderful to discover, and I wanted to share it. In 1947, he returned to France and settled there until his death in 1987. MARC CHAGALL lived 97 years long. In regard to this series of embroideries, they are inspired by a vintage infographic of how to pick someone that is unconscious or fainted, and by a Bible verse from Isaiah's book that says, "Your country is desolate, your cities burned with fire. Your fields are being stripped by foreigners right before you, laid waste as when overthrown by strangers." And I'm really happy with the final artwork. There will be 4 of them, and I already finished them, and they are being framed, and I can't wait to see them completed. But that's it for this video. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. That would be awesome, and it will let me know that you want to see these videos also in English, and leave a like and all of the things that help in this sea of information that is YouTube. I will be back soon with another video, sending you a big hug. Bye!